All right, welcome back to The Explainer. You know, we usually think of history as this solid, unbroken timeline of recorded facts. But honestly, the truth is that history is actually full of these fragile, missing threads. I mean, we're talking about entire chapters that have just slipped through our fingers. So today, we're going to look closely at those blank spaces, mapping out some of the absolute biggest, most enduring mysteries humanity has ever seen.
So think about this for a second. What if history's biggest secrets aren't actually about what happened, but what disappeared? It's kind of haunting to think about, right? And we're not just talking about somebody misplacing a crown or a lost letter here, no way. We're talking about how entire armies, sovereign kings, and literally mountains of treasure can just vanish into thin air, totally defying every single attempt by modern science and archaeology to track them down.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got four main areas to cover today. First, vanished wealth. Then, lost rulers and missing armies. Third, the erasure of knowledge. And finally, the secret we actually found.
Let's kick things off with our first theme, vanished wealth and sunken fleets.
Just look at the sheer, mind-boggling scale of what's been lost across the globe. You've got the Mali Empire, where these vast, unimaginable reserves of gold just dropped right out of the historical record. Or the Knights Templar. We're talking priceless relics and massive financial deeds gone. The Mongols lost entire treasure fleets to the ocean. And over in Scotland, King Robert the Bruce's royal treasury was just completely scattered. I mean, how do fortunes of this magnitude just slip away?
Well, to really get a handle on this, we have to separate the Hollywood myth from historical reality. Take the Knights Templar, for example. The legend tells us that when the French king arrested them in 1307, vast vaults of gold, maybe even the Holy Grail itself, were secretly smuggled out of Paris and La Rochelle. Sounds like a great movie, right? But the historical reality is a bit more grounded. Modern historians point out that the Templars' true wealth was mostly locked up in land deeds, agricultural income, and these really complex financial agreements. We're not taking sides on exactly what went missing here, but it really shows how losing a bunch of boring administrative records can easily balloon into these epic myths of legendary hidden gold over the centuries.
And here's the thing, human conspiracy isn't always to blame. A lot of the time, nature just takes over. Take Kublai Khan's massive invasion fleets, which were definitely carrying tremendous imperial wealth. They were completely wiped out by what the Japanese called kamikaze typhoons in the 13th century. Over in Scotland, Robert the Bruce's royal treasury was probably scattered across those rugged, remote Scottish glens during wartime instability, and simply lost to the elements. And the unimaginable gold of the Mali Empire, once ruled by Mansa Musa, it likely just dispersed or vanished into the shifting Saharan sands as the empire slowly declined. Time, natural disasters, and just totally unforgiving landscapes literally swallowed these riches whole.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how it goes beyond objects. Let's move to lost rulers and missing armies.
Let's break down this incredibly puzzling historical cold case surrounding King Edward II of England. The official account says that after he was deposed in 1327, he was gruesomely murdered in secret at Berkeley Castle. Case closed, right? Well, maybe not. There's this document called the Fieschi Letter, written by an Italian cleric, which actually claims Edward escaped. It says he lived out the rest of his life quietly as a religious hermit in Europe. Now, we're looking at this impartially. The official records definitely give us a neat, tidy conclusion, but alternative documents from the time show us just how fragile that certainty really is. Official history can very easily obscure alternative possibilities.
Speaking of obscured history, look at the absolute extreme lengths taken for Genghis Khan. When he died in 1227, he asked for a completely secret burial. The legend goes that his escorts killed literally everyone who happened to see the funeral procession. Then, to make absolutely sure, they allegedly had a stampede of horses trample the burial site at Burkhan Khaldun over and over to erase any physical trace. And honestly, it worked flawlessly. 8 centuries later, even with all our modern satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, the final resting place of one of history's most famous conquerors is still totally undiscovered. Wild, right?
But the mysteries get even bigger than one man. 2,000. That is the absolutely staggering number of ships in a 14th century Malian fleet organized by Abu Bakr II. According to historical accounts passed down by Mansa Musa, this ruler actually abandoned his throne just to go find the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. He sailed west with 2,000 ships packed to the brim with men and supplies, and they never came back. An entire maritime expedition just totally swallowed up by the immense, unforgiving Atlantic.
And you know, the desert can be just as ruthless as the ocean. Think about this. How does an entire army vanish into the sand without leaving a single trace?
That's the mystery of the 14th century Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir's massive expedition. They marched out into the remote North African desert and just disappeared. Was it a freak massive sandstorm? Did they lose their way between oases? Or were they wiped out in some unrecorded battle? We just don't know. The harsh desert consumed them entirely, leaving not a fragment of armor or even a single footprint behind.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and look at Chapter 3, the erasure of knowledge.
Losing gold is one thing, but the destruction of human knowledge? That's truly devastating. In 1258, Mongol forces completely destroyed Baghdad's House of Wisdom, which was essentially the greatest intellectual center of the medieval world. Priceless manuscripts full of ancient science, math, and philosophy were just casually tossed into the Tigris River. It's heartbreaking. And it's not just the past destroying the past. Beneath Jerusalem's Temple Mount right now, there are unseen cisterns and tunnels holding totally unexcavated secrets. We're talking missing archives that could literally rewrite our understanding of medieval science and religion. But due to modern political and physical constraints, they remain agonizingly out of our reach.
Let's move to something even darker and see how this builds, because this erasure can also be biological. Let's trace the frankly terrifying chain reaction at the Siege of Kaffa in 1346. Step 1. The Mongol Golden Horde lays siege to this bustling Genoese trading port. Step 2. As a horrible disease strikes the attackers, they allegedly start flinging their own infected corpses right over the city walls. Step 3. Fleas carrying the plague spread to the fleeing Genoese merchant ships. And Step 4. Those ships dock at Mediterranean ports, sparking the Black Death that goes on to absolutely decimate Europe.
Now, historians are actually pretty divided on exactly how this played out. On one side, you have the theory of deliberate biological warfare, the terrifying idea that they intentionally weaponized those infected corpses. On the flip side, there's the natural ecological shift theory, which argues that interconnected trade routes and circulating flea populations would have naturally spread the bacteria anyway. We're not saying one is definitely right and the other is wrong, but the main takeaway here is how this invisible biological force, whether it was weaponized or just a natural occurrence, fundamentally altered the course of human history, leaving a massive trail of questions we're still trying to answer today.
Okay, let's lighten things up a bit for our final section. Chapter 4, The Secret We Actually Found.
I want to introduce you to the honors of Scotland. We're talking about the crown, the scepter, and the sword of state. These pieces are literally medieval Europe's oldest surviving regalia. And what's absolutely fascinating and kind of hilarious is that these priceless, vital symbols of a sovereign nation miraculously vanished. Not just once, but twice.
Here's how it happened. Back in the 1650s, during Oliver Cromwell's invasion, everyday people, like a local woman named Christian Fletcher, took enormous risks to smuggle these jewels out of the besieged Dunatar Castle. They kept them safe and returned them to Edinburgh Castle in 1660. All good, right? Well, fast forward to the Acts of Union in 1707. Political shifts basically made the jewels ceremonially obsolete. So what did they do? They locked them in an oak chest in a sealed room and literally just forgot about them for over a century. It wasn't until 1818 that the famous novelist Sir Walter Scott finally got curious, led an expedition to open up that dusty old chest, and rediscovered them.
It really proves the quote, "Sometimes extraordinary mysteries emerge from entirely ordinary events." The honors of Scotland weren't hidden away by some grand, shadowy conspiracy. They weren't swallowed by a mythical natural disaster. They were hidden by decades of just simple, ordinary neglect. A locked door, a missed priority, and the slow march of time were literally all it took to erase a kingdom's greatest treasure from living memory.
Which brings us to our final thought for today, and it's a bit of a brain bender. If Scotland's greatest royal treasures could sit totally forgotten in a locked room for over 100 years, what other remarkable relics of history are still resting undiscovered, waiting quietly right beneath our feet? I mean, how many lost manuscripts, sunken fleets, or buried treasuries are sitting just out of sight, just waiting for the right person to look in the exact right place? Keep questioning, keep digging into the past, and thank you so much for joining me on This Explainer.